Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
Welcome back to the Pasture Primetime with Neil, where we uncover the roots and shape the future of regenerative agriculture, one conversation at a time. And I'm your host, Neil. And today's episode is a real treat for me and for anyone passionate about soil, sustainability, and the systems that feed us. Joining me is Harriette Brainard from Soil Information, a dynamic force in rethinking how we engage with land, food, and systems, and environmental integrity as well. Harriette wears many hats: climate risk communicator, sustainability consultant, strategist, and champion for soil health. If there's a conversation to be had about bridging science, storytelling, and action in regenerative practices, Harriette is leading it. Harriette, it's a great pleasure to have you here today, and I look forward to our conversation. If you could share a little bit about your background, and maybe you could just hammer on the question of why soil?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And I won't try not to get too into the weeds about it. I would say, I've been an avid environmentalist and focused on the environment my whole life. But soil has always been something I've thought about, but not at the length I am today, of course. And I would say that really changed when I was approached by the group that started Soil Information. And I was working in food systems transformation. Of course, soil and water and so forth are an integral part of that. But I hadn't really focused on soil. I was focusing on the system itself. And I was approached by this group that explained to me that they were trying to democratize soil measurement. So how do you bring soil measurement into the mainstream, and especially because majority of the world is fed by small farmers? So how are we going to do that if they don't even know what's underneath their feet? And especially so many farmers are really working to enhance their soil because they're dependent on the yield. They're dependent on what they produce for their livelihood. So soil is really very, very important to them as well. And so when I was approached by this group, they explained to me that they think they had discovered something that was really going to democratize the movement. In what I mean by that was an in-ground soil measurement that was inexpensive enough that you could get it to much of the world, and those that couldn't even afford it at a smaller level, or a smaller amount, I should say, there's other forms of government subsidy programs, philanthropists, foundations, and so forth that could supply that, even larger organizations that could supply that to their food chains. So when they explained that to me, I was like, okay, sounds like you have the missing piece to the food system itself and to the security of our planet, security of humanity and security of our planet. So it all fit together for me. And when they asked if I would join the team, I did. And that was in the fall of 2022.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you and I have known each other for a while now, and I'm really excited about what you're doing at Soil Information. I think the democratization of that data is so important. Maybe you can talk just a little bit about the platform and what's up and coming with Soil Information.
Yeah. And I think in the intro, you touched on something that I think is really critical. And that is how do you build all these connections and between the science and the soil? And it's kind of funny, when I first joined Soil Information, 6 months in, they said, will you go to the International Soil Conference in South Korea and speak? And I was just like, excuse me, I'm not a soil scientist. I was like, what am I doing here? But I think that was the start of what you're speaking to. Here I was in a room with the top soil scientists in the world, and they were the most esteemed, working on this issue of how we grow for the future. And for them, it had been focused on yield. Even at that level, all these soil scientists had really been focused on yield. They hadn't really been focused on health, which of course they were concerned about, but it wasn't what drove them. It wasn't what drove their paycheck, quite frankly.
Right.
And so I went and I gave a discussion on what we had discovered. We had just figured out that we actually had something that was viable. And so I got up there and spoke to it. And I had fully admitted I wasn't a soil scientist, but I was really invested in this space because of what it meant. And so fast forward, I had a great conversation through a translator. Of course, he didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any Korean, but he was a top soil scientist in South Korea. And I think this is critical to our discussion. I learned that the government of South Korea paid for measuring the soil on every single farm in South Korea because they thought it was so critical to their future. And I realized at that moment sort of, and they're the only country in the world that did this at the time. So I realized at that moment, these connections, this language, how do we connect the soil and the scientists and those who are just really understand the biology of soil to those that are working and producing and to those who are consuming? How do we make all those connections? And I realize now that that's really where my entry point has really, I focused more than I did at the time. I didn't realize I was focusing so much on that. But if we don't, anyway, at that conference, I should speak to what happened. At that conference, the whole discussion switched from yield to health of the soil.
Amazing.
At that level, at the top level in the world, the soil scientists are realizing the only way to move forward was to restore the health of the soil because it's so depleted. And since that time, I just came back from a soil conference in the Netherlands. And for the first time ever, they had a big portion of that conference devoted to regenerative agriculture. Never happened before. So these links are beginning to come together. There's still a great deal to be done, and there's still a great deal of gaps. And I know that's what we're going to speak to a bit today.
Yeah, it's so great to hear that the links are coming together. It's something that I've been passionate about. I know you and I have worked on different conversations and, specifically around some field related work. And it's so important to get away from yield conversations and talk about all the things that we're going to discuss. And it's really where I start and stop my conversations. I was actually on a discussion yesterday around AI and soil health and sort of like that disconnect. I know you and I spoke about this last week, actually, just as recently as last week. And while I champion technology moving us in the right direction for efficiency's sake, I think that connection to soil trumps what technology can do, and that we really need to get down to telling better stories about it. And so maybe that is a great thread to pull on and dive into. When we think about what's working at the field level, the connection between the farmers and the knowledge base around soil science, maybe we can talk about what's working and what isn't there from your perspective.
Yeah. It's such a great entry point. I think at the consumer level, at the level outside of the producers, let's put it that way, people are vastly unaware, because I'm including myself in this, of the scientific level of the farmer. The farmer is so smart. And I don't mean just in the knowledge when they pick up some soil and they look at it. They have the technology that they utilize, even at this point, before the entry point of AI into the system, is just incredible. And they are engineers. If their equipment breaks down, or if they try to change their equipment from traditional, equipment into a regenerative style tractor, they do that themselves. No one is selling that type of tractor to them. Maybe now that's changing, but at the time, no one was selling that tractor. So they had to transform their own tractor into something that worked better if they wanted to restore their soil. So I think that's something that really is not well understood. And even now, I mean, it's beginning. I see these little glimmers of hope that people are beginning to understand this. And I think also one of the women, Zach Ducheneau, was working with the USDA, and he's got a big ranch out in the Dakotas. And someone in his family, Kelsey Scott, who's on the Intertribal Council, was just speaking. And she was talking about, which really struck me, she was talking about coming to this conference to speak. And she said, it was really tough. she said, I have a big ranch that I run with my family. And I know that we have all this work to do on the field. And yet I know that if I don't come to this conference and speak to people about what we're doing, I'm not communicating enough and not moving the language, moving the movement, moving everything forward.
Yeah.
And so she said, I knew I had to come, but I'm leaving my responsibilities. I'm also leaving my young 2-year-old who's looking at me going, why are you going? So I think that speaks to the level of commitment that these producers have on the land. And they know that they have a full day's work. Then they go in and they're on their computer and they're working all their data, and they know that that is critical to what they're doing, and they have to share this data, and they must try to communicate what they're doing to others. But it is really, there's still not the building blocks that need to be there. And I think part of this is we're spending so much time trying to define the regenerative movement. And I mean, I'm on so many conversations, people are saying, well, how do you define it? What is regenerative? And I listened to this woman and I was thinking, because I feel this way too, why are we spending so much time? It's just about restoring the life into the ground that we have destroyed through practices that we may not have been aware of. I'm not saying we did it, we not set out to do that, but that's what's happened. And so it's really restoring life for ourselves and for the planet. And I think we have to get away from worrying so much about that and getting into how do we build these connections. And I do believe AI is really important, but I will say it's just a piece of this. If we're not on the ground supporting those producers to restore the soil, AI is not going to make a bit of difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you speak to a lot of key elements there. One, smaller, do more with less on your land, so we don't need to continue to acquire land, but really get intimate with your land. I love that fact that you talked about, the sacrifices farmers make just so that we can start improving our ecological environments, of which we grow or raise our food. And that's really where I sort of come in at is, it's more about an ecological change as opposed to defining a term that has a set of practices, because the only thing that's really captured my attention in any of the sort of transformational methodologies that are out there and these movements is we need to be adaptive, and whether that is with our livestock, with our phytology knowledge, our plants, whether it's soil, but it's the farmers that are intimately knowledgeable about their ecosystem that can be adaptive. No one person can parachute in and say, use this technology and we'll be adaptive on your land. We need that knowledge. We need the tribal knowledge, the ancient knowledge that we need to capture that data, and we need to put that data somewhere safe and then correlate it with the farmer's knowledge around those ecological. And then technology can continue enhancing that. But the adaptiveness of our ecological changes is kind of where I sit.
Oh my gosh.
I'm speaking a lot to that.
It's really, and I won't get too much into it. I was just so moved yesterday by a farmer who was speaking. He was speaking about pest control, and he was so intimately involved with what was going on his property. He knew exactly what to do to shift. And he did say something that this wonderful farmer out in Nebraska had said to me, who's been doing regenerative practices since the late 50s, the same thing: diversity, diversity, diversity. And so I speak to that a great deal now, because the farmers that are really integrating and doing these type of this work and collecting this data, they're really focused on diversity. And they understand that also diversity can bring another revenue stream to them as well.
Totally. So from your perspective, and I work over at Grow here, and we've got this fancy thing called the blockchain. But where does data? How does data help us democratize our systems and really bring power back to the farmer through sovereignty or through other mechanisms? I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit nervous about Web3, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. It's not that; it's just when you don't understand it, like anything else, you get a little like, well, I don't understand that, so I'm a little nervous about it.
Hmm.
So, it's been great to raise my level of understanding of blockchain and what Grow is doing. And I really have shifted dramatically in this space because number one, what we've been doing is not working. Let's be
Hmm.
clear. I mean, it's great that I'm at this conference, but most of the people at this conference believe enough to be at this conference. We're not reaching a tremendous amount of people. And there was a fellow from Barclays Bank yesterday speaking, and he was like, well, there's just, there's not the transparency yet. There's not the understanding, he's getting into this level, which I wanted to stand up and say, it's coming. I mean, both the work that I do with soil information, which is collecting that data right in the ground. You don't have to take it anywhere. You don't have to take it to a lab. The farmer can have access to their own data immediately and in real time, which is enormous. And
Hmm.
if you play that into the blockchain, into what Grow United is doing, you have such a transparency, which is what all these investment groups and all these others are saying is missing. It is right there in front of them. And so I've become quite a real big believer in this because you, the point is to keep the producer ownership of all this data. And what's been happening is we've been asking so much of the producer, not only we want you to restore your soil, raise your yields, do this without much money
Hmm.
because we don't really trust you, just maybe, or what,
Yeah.
because we don't have enough data. But then
Yeah.
you're also supposed to collect all this data and give it to us in a way that we understand it. I mean, it's just ridiculous, honestly. So I really am excited about what Grow's doing because this is a fully transparent way to keep the resources at the ground level for the producer, but yet illustrate them to the community that's not here at this conference. That's
Hmm.
either with their family or and buying the goods in the grocery store, or they're looking to make an investment in land. And because there's beginning, people are. I will say the investment community is beginning to really understand that restoration of the land is the only path forward. So there is an understanding around that, but there's still not the transparency which Grow United and Web3, I think, really brings to that. And the work I'm doing, I think, plays an important role at the soil level.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. One of the things I want to tap into is your probes that you have there, are going to be out there collecting that data that the farmers have in real time. And I think I'm so excited to see this come to life because real time data that is owned by a farmer of any size is very, very important.
Yeah.
Maybe you could speak to some of the data sets that are going to come out of that, because typically we've seen a lot of the soil information has a heavy focus towards carbon. And I think there's just so much missing there, in terms of the micro and the macro. And we're talking about food is health. And so what goes into healthy foods, and that's
Right.
organic matter in the soil. And so maybe you could just speak a little bit to that, because I think that's very important for the audience to hear
Yeah.
on how SIF is going to be transformative in the information that's pulled off, that the data that the farmer can use in different ways that isn't available today. With,
There's two things you brought up, and I will speak to the data. I also want to just start out at that level of food is health and also carbon. I think those are two very critical paths forward. I
Mhm.
think there's definitely been an overemphasis on carbon, but I think part of that is people don't understand the importance of carbon. They're
Mhm.
looking at it purely as a monetary piece, whereas carbon is essential. It's organic matter in the soil, and it's essential to the health of the soil. And so
Mhm.
I think we have to we have to sort of bridge that communication gap too, where people just don't look at carbon and soil as purely a sink of how to
Right.
get out of this mess we're in with climate.
Yeah.
It's really an essential part of the soil. And interestingly enough, there's a group that I just learned about in Europe that is they were overprescribed. It's a family office that is basically raising funds for producers, They are carbon focused, but only because they saw that as a path forward. And they're also in Europe very worried about water. And as we know, carbon is a water purifier. So it's very essential to Europe's concern about water going forward, both as a soil as a sponge and both as a counter to drought. But it's interesting because I think their learning is a little bit more advanced about the importance of carbon than here in the U.S. But
Do you
food
think
is.
that has to do, sorry to jump
Oh
in
no,
there,
go
do you
ahead.
think that has to do with the size of land in Europe?
I think
Um,
so. I think that it's easier to, you have different entities. Of course, you have all these
mhm,
different countries. Each one is working together on a total soil health. So I was at the conference, and they're actually now setting a standard for soil health across Europe with all these
okay,
countries.
yeah.
I think because they are smaller, it's easier to get these messaging across. It's
hmm
too bad, we are just vast. And, you know, I've driven across country. A lot of people have not had that pleasure of driving,
hmm
and I've stopped at farmers. So I mean, I have a different perspective, but it's a long way.
It
um,
is.
so I think that's part of it. I think for here in the U.S., the food is health movement is moving this messaging a little bit faster, and I think that's really a way in to this communication gap. I really do. I think that's a huge piece of it here in the U.S. I think also in Europe, they've understood soil is health and food is health a lot longer than we have. We really
hmm
diverted out of that further than most other countries. Um,
hmm
but getting back to what soil information does, having the access. So we've developed these sensors that measure both pools of carbon. Most people have not been able to measure inorganic carbon, and largely before this, because they couldn't measure it, they thought that inorganic carbon, which is largely your rocks and your minerals and so forth, were essentially stable, but they're not. And whether that's because of the methodologies of fracking and other things that we do in the ground
Right.
here, and it could be, we don't necessarily know that, but it moves in tandem with soil organic carbon.
hmm
So both pools of carbon are essential to get a full carbon picture. And so we measure both pools of carbon. We measure both full pools of nitrogen, which is nitrate ammonium, pH, bulk density, and then we have a total carbon sensor as well. So we're building probes with all those sensors, but we're furthering this science because it's pretty amazing. We're getting into the microderm of the soil, the microbiome of the soil. So we're going to be able to understand soil even at deeper levels than we thought. So we're working on that right now while we build or commercialize the probe for the farmer with those other sensors. And I can't tell you the way everybody's eyes light up when I talk about the probe. When I talk to farmers in Colombia, in the US or Europe, and scientists, and I say, oh, you're going to be able to see the carbon flux and in real time, and they're
Yeah.
just like, their eyes just go big. They're like, you're kidding. I mean, so this is really a big deal. And as you said, for the farmer to have access to this, but also ownership of that is huge. And we're really focused. They have full ownership of their data. So I think we go forward, there's going to be a lot more power in this for the
Yeah.
producer because they'll have access to real-time data. They won't be sending it out to a soil lab, which is a big deal. And it won't have the cost structure that it has today.
Yeah. That's amazing. The term that always comes to mind when we talk about those probes is TikTok, total inorganic, total organic. So the TikTok for soil, as it were,
Yeah,
the stories that are going to be told, and I love
yeah,
that. I think there's so much
a
that we
big
don't know
story.
about soil, and the information that we can gather both in real time and then compared to historical is very, very important. Um, and I know that in understanding the full flux there, the other piece that ties very nicely into that sort of food is health is what nutrient components are available and what aren't available. And a question I had actually that I don't know we've covered, the inorganic structure on top of the soil, as farmers we call that trash sometimes at the end of harvest, the leftover. Um, does that get picked up in any of your probe information?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay.
And it's it's interesting because we go deep enough to get the full spectrum of the carbon cycle, but we also can gather the what's on top. Of course, that's going to be a little bit dependent upon what is on top, but
Right.
it does pick up all those elements. And especially as you go across the country, there are places that there's a great deal more on top than
Hmm.
other places. Um, and with the rise of no-till and cover cropping, which has been so essential, you have to gather that above ground carbon flux along,
Yeah.
carbon material, I should say. I think people forget, when people even clean out their own gardens every spring and fall, they forget that that is essential to. I mean, that's where all the insects live, and people don't. It's. I understand, but most people don't understand the depth, the complexity of soil. It's just massive, and we
Yeah.
have very little understanding of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I often say the statement that we have been trained on an aesthetic appeal of how gardens, farms should look, and really ecology is messy, and that we should get really comfortable with messy looking gardens and farms for the sake that you talked about, the cover crops, the organic material, the decomposition that's happening above soil right on the top of our soil canopy, and that filters down into the soil membrane, as it were.
I love you saying that because it's just that is so true. We got so caught up in the beauty of what a farmland can look like, and we
Hmm.
forgot that is not really, it is messy.
Hmm.
Um, it brings me to, as you know, my son has a farm in the New York State, and
Hmm.
when I go to his farm, it's messy. I mean, it's beautiful because he's got so much growing, but it is not, you know, it's messy.
Yeah.
And but the noise on that farm in the morning from the bugs and the birds and all the other it is just overwhelming. When you
Hmm.
go out in the morning, you can't even hear yourself think because of the noise that's going on. And it's because he's got a messy farm, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah. He's invited back the ecology, the wildlife,
Right. He's
everything that's
allowing
needed
the
there.
ecology to do its thing because nature knows what to do. We've just been stopping nature from doing what nature knows best, really.
Yeah.
Um, which
Yeah.
is, goes back to the Indian Tribal Council, and that's what she was saying. We just, we don't talk about regenerative ag. We just talk about allowing nature to do what it's best, assisting nature in what nature knows how to do,
Yeah. There was
honoring nothing.
a there was a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago, where we were sort of talking about organic and what organic meant, and what regenerative meant, and what sustainable meant. And I think you've mentioned it, I've mentioned it on this conversation here. We need to get away from the labels, and we need to start
Yeah.
talking about what it is we're eating, what's involved, and then what ecological system did that come from, i.e., a farm, and how does that look? Is it messy? Is it what's going into it? And that certainly isn't to point fingers at the way that the farming
Mm.
practices that have got us here today. We got to recognize the science and the things that have allowed us to get here, but we got to take a very sharp left turn to start making some real impact, particularly in North America. But what I really like, and you mentioned it, is what you're doing at Soil Information, what we talk about in this ecological change that is needed at the farm level. We can do this in Colombia, we can do this in Europe, we can do this in South Africa, and we can do it in our broad acre system in North America,
Yeah.
Canada and US alike.
Yeah.
And maybe on that note, I'll ask you a question that is large, complex, but I'd love to just get your perspective. What isn't working in our agriculture system today, and specifically within, call it the North American model?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good distinction because I believe what's not working is very different when you go to different parts of the world. We've obviously had a large impact on what goes on in different parts of the world. I mean, when I was in Korea and talking to farmers, they were saying we're really, we bought into, because we're trading partners with the US, we bought into utilizing glyphosate and other things, in our soil. We're now moving away from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to figure out what's good for us. And I think that's something that everybody, nothing is uniform. We just said that, it's messy. What's working in South America won't necessarily work anywhere else. And that can be from country to country too. And, every country, I mean, Chile is very different from Brazil. And so there's no uniform practice. And now, so I think trying to make it uniform has been a real problem across the world, because we got caught up in the narrative of we need this type of farming to feed the world. And so everybody just bought into that. And now we have to move to a different focus. And this gets into, food is health.
Yeah.
We have to, here in the North America region, we don't realize that if we're eating an orange today, it doesn't even come close to the nutrient levels that it used to have. So we're having to eat 6 oranges to get the nutrient. I'm, generalizing. I don't know if it's exactly 6, somewhere around 6 oranges.
I think it's
to
even
get
more
the
than
nutrient, right? Probably more than that to
Yeah.
get the nutrient levels that you need. We are walking around, all of us, with such low nutrient levels, and what we've done is we've said, oh well, it's protein, and so there was this huge, everybody's taking a protein shake every single morning, and they're forgetting that actually that protein shake is not stimulating their gums and their teeth to gnash up food, and stimulating the enzymes in their body. I mean, I've done a lot of this work, so we keep trying to add this quick fix to the problem that is really at the producer level, and it's not their fault. It's just it's how we grow our food. And so instead we're like, oh, well, I'm not healthy, I don't have enough protein, I don't know if that, so I'm going to add this, I'm going to get a protein bar every day, I'm going to do this. No. Let's get back to, because your body is built to actually eat the food from the ground. It's a kind of, when you look at it that way, I mean, I look at it this way. I mean, I always tell people, if they like cars, for example, which I do, think of your body as the most expensive car you could even imagine. Would you take care of that? I mean, anybody who has an expensive car probably takes really good care of that car. We don't take care of our bodies that way at all. And so I tell people, people think I'm probably pretty, I can be, when I travel, I'm very careful about what I eat, because I view my body as it's the most important thing I have. And it's not in order to live long necessarily. It's just to operate well every day. I want to be able to be at my best because I want to do the work I'm doing. So it all goes full circle. So therefore, I want the soil to be the healthiest it can be, because if the nutrients are in the soil, the nutrients will be in that carrot. And so we have to assist the producer to get those nutrients and get that soil to be really healthy in order to get that carrot that we're eating that's going to nourish ourselves. And so we can be at optimum health, which will then, of course, drive down health costs. It will improve our bottom line because we won't be spending the money at the doctors, and we'll be supporting a total package of farmer, producer, but also the environment and our surroundings. We're going to be just healthy in general. So it's just, to me, it's such a, there's so much clarity around it. But I'm only one person. So when I talk to people about this, I mean, my friends or stuff, they're like, oh, I get it. And they get really excited about it. But we need to do better at that messaging. And I haven't quite been working on that.
And I think probably the delta there is where we get our food. It's one of the things we're working very hard at over on the Grow blockchain is, farm direct to consumer, but really creating these, dare I say it, food resilient local hubs, and more access directly from farmers. So knowing where your food is grown, understanding the origin story of what's gone into growing or raising that food. And just spending the time to access it. But we've been trained, again, this North American mindset, and it's different around the world, but certainly North America, to have food at our fingertip, and delivered to our door now. And I think the quickest thing is, oh, I don't have time, I'll just get food delivered to my door in these companies.
I mean, it's easy to be lazy. I mean,
totally.
And
It's
Yeah.
funny. I was saying this to my sister, and you might align with this a little bit, but I was saying, um, that laziness bone to me is that you just aren't getting the right nutrients, and so your body's sort of shutting down. And so then what do? We feed the circle, we hit the button, Amazon
Right.
delivers, you
Exactly.
know, the
And we're
food that
just
we
driving
need.
down our health every single day that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know, 100%. And I've been blessed that for the last few years I've been in the New England area, which does have an incredible localized food system, regional food system, and it's growing all the time. It's much harder in other parts of, as you go west and into the Midwest and West, you have these large expanses of land. And I'll never forget driving to go across the country a couple times, and there was no gardens. There was no way to access healthy food. And so I do feel that that's a priority for me and hopefully for others, because it is easier. I mean, I think that's why the European model is, there's a lot of regional food systems in Europe. In New England, there are a lot, but in California, they have a smaller region. I mean, but it's harder when you have these large expanses of land. So how do we create those regional, pictures and duplicate kind of regional growth? And that's why I think what you're doing is really can assist in that, because I think that's really important. I think it's critically important because they're not only our largest producers, but they're also need to be healthy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, the comparables I often get are it's got to be farmer's market or CSA or the grocer. And that, there isn't this in between, and that messaging that you're talking about, I think, is really that messy middle that we need to start interacting with that messy middle in a different way to create these regional hubs, these resilient opportunities. But it's about finding time to get back and connected with farmers right around you. And it doesn't matter how urban you are or how rural you are, you're going to have access to farmers in
it's just
close distance.
I think hearing a farmer's story is the most, for me, it just changes every day. There's nothing like going to a farmer's market and talking to each farmer and learning what their day is like and what they're doing. There's nothing like it. And I know everybody doesn't have that access, but I think that's really important. And I think that works in other countries because of they have to depend on regional food systems.
Yeah. As we're getting near the end here, and this is just sort of scratch the surface, Harriette, in our conversation. I look forward to many more and hearing about the advancements of SIF and all the stuff that you're doing. I'd love to just give an opportunity to talk about any stand-up projects or community-related initiatives that you think is worth noting or bringing to the forefront.
Interesting you said that. I think there was a presentation yesterday. So as you know, I'm involved in some other things as well, and I have a big educational background. So I'm always trying to figure out how to advance consumer education and youth support. And so I'm involved with Tufts, the Friedman School of Tufts, around food and innovation on that level. But I'm also working with some other leaders on this program. How do we assist youth, and how do we assist youth leadership, number one, but also I do believe that there's a real responsibility to our youth right now, not only in leaving them, stewarding the land for them, but in terms of education. And, there's a program that was introduced yesterday. So I'm kind of excited about that. And the young woman who introduced it, she and I are already trying to think of ways we can advance the work that they're doing. The Rockefeller Foundation is bringing forward a program that's focused on healthy food in schools. And it's something very dear to my heart. I was working in an urban setting trying to do that myself. It was like going very much uphill for me. It was really tough getting the students understood. It was getting the adults in the room to understand the importance of that. Students actually, once they understand the importance of good food, they'll get excited about it. It's the support from the older generations that we need more of, and both in youth stewardship and youth leadership, everything. We just need more support and more networking. So I am kind of excited about that because this is a young woman. She's energetic. I also met another young woman recently who I'm helping start a program called Kids in Nutrition, and she just got into Iowa State. She's in 10 universities across the U.S., and it's all volunteer. She's on food stamps herself so that she can advance this program because she doesn't have any funds herself. That's how dedicated young people are. She started this program freshman year in college, and it's all volunteer, and it's college students going into elementary schools and so forth in their regions where the university is, and talking about health is food and food is health and all that, and those are the kind of things that I'm excited about. So I just wanted to end with that because I do feel that there's, I'm trying to put some more energy into that work because I just feel like there's a lot that we could do in that sector.
Amazing. And I'd love to take that offline. I think there's a lot, Grow can help contribute in the learn to earn model and continue to incentivize around that. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And thank you for taking some time out of the conference to speak to me today and be here. For all of you listening and watching, I hope you've gleaned a few nuggets to ponder and take away. I'll make sure that Harriette's contact information is posted on this episode. And until next time, the Grow Renaissance series, Pasture Primetime, we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this episode. Remember, it will take a community of us to do the best in the world and truly nourish not only ourselves, but the planet, the atmosphere, the soil, the plants, and the animals on it. So make sure you spread this message anywhere that you can.